All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Sorry, I see my various shows interfering with my usual introduction there. But welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends, your usual Sunday evening viewing here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show, where we, of course, wrap up your news week that was with a who's who of very interesting voices, the sort of voices you will not hear on your mainstream media publications. But nonetheless, this is Liberty and Friends. As I said, my name is Sindile Vabaza, aka Big Daddy Liberty. I must ask the viewers, please, for just a bit of indulgence. I'm having a terrible connection, so I can actually hear myself. I'm not sure if I'm even on air, but nonetheless, nothing changes insofar as what I like you guys to do for me, which is, of course, to hit that like button. I hate the fact that I'm having to do this by reaching to my phone to do this. Usually I have a nice little control panel down here, which is not working. But remember, guys, you can hit the like button, of course, which helps grow and really get the reach out of this particular show. Our numbers are growing quite steadily. We're sitting, I think, at 41,500 now on YouTube. Massive growth since the beginning of the year. And of course, 77,000 on Facebook. Both instances, I'm very grateful for the new folks who are fans of the show. With that being said, another thing you can do for me, of course, if you are watching on YouTube, is to subscribe to the show. Become a part of, let me take these off. I cannot concentrate. Sorry. So subscribe, of course, to the show, and help me reach my goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Guys, a firm reminder that you're able to support the show financially. Anything between 50 to 100 Rand a month. 75 Rand is about the sweet spot that we do per month, and you can find a payment method that suits you on our website. Visit us, please, at bigdaddyliberty.com. Right, with that being said, and with this being a absolutely chaotic start to this Sunday show, you'll forgive me, folks, it won't be as smooth as usual. We're having connection issues that are, Anyway, nonetheless, welcome to it. As always on Liberty and Friends, I do not come alone. I'm joined by the Friends panel, as I just get that off the screen, the Friends panel who are joining me this evening. Now, I'm hoping this will work somehow and it won't jam on me. But first up, he is, of course, the host of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. Of course, that is his namesake, as it is Chris Wyatt himself, the retired colonel up in the house. Please, Lord, I hope this works. There he is on screen. Chris, hello. Just give me a second. I can't actually hear you. Give me a second
but the audience can hear me just fine while he tries to sort it out.
New system that is forcing me to do this. But Chris, how are you doing, man?
All right, folks, while Sile gets that set up, I'll just say hello to everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And wow, amazing growth on the channel. I got to say, really something else. Back before my channel was censored, I was actually ways ahead of Sile and Big Daddy Liberty Show in those days. And I can't hold a candle to them today. Now they've not only reached and surpassed my shadow band channel, but are leaving me far in the dust. It was never competition, but if it was, I'd be getting my butt kicked.
Man, it's good to have you on. I'm hoping I'm audible here, Chris.
I can hear you in Streamlabs. Let me see if I can hear you on the live.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha on both. Gotcha on both.
Thank you, brother. Good to have you on the show. Again, I must apologize to the viewers. This won't be as smooth as it usually is. I'm literally doing everything through my phone, which ordinarily just acts as a camera. So I don't have my control panel. So apologies to my viewers who are used to a much more slicker product. But nonetheless, the show must go on. Speaking about the show going on, as I messed that up. All right, I'm back there. We are also joined, of course, by from the Institute of Race Relations. Please load, please load. Just give me a second, folks. Joining us from the Institute of Race Relations is a very familiar face here on the show. He is, of course, part of the campaigns team over there. I'll just have him confirm as to what he is doing now officially at the IRR. I'm talking, of course, about writer and analyst Gabriel Crouse. As soon as I can just get him on screen, dear viewer, just bear with me, please, for a second here. There he is, I think. Gabriel Baba, hello.
Hey, sir. Hola. How's it? Very good to see you. Yeah, what am I doing?
Man.
We're campaigning at the IRR. It's very interesting times. It's been a crazy first quarter. I think that we're going to get into it. But what a relief that we're all still standing after the shutdown squib.
You mean the letdown, the national letdown.
The grand national letdown. Yes,
there you go.
Build on success. Looking to build on success.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's, of course, Upra GC. That's Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations. Guys, I'm seeing the comments on the screen. Jason, I see your comments about the muffled sound. I'm really, really sorry about that. As I said, it is a technical difficulty right now, which I'm hoping I'll resolve as the show goes on. I'm using these earphones for sound, so they're not ideal as opposed to my usual mic over here. Sorry, I did have to explain all of that because some people will probably wonder as to what is going on tonight. With that being said, here's a chap who we haven't seen in a while, but on the last show, definitely left the lion's share, perhaps, of comments with people giving him kudos and, with the refreshing takes. I'm talking, of course, about writer and analyst Sindile Vabaza. Sindile, good evening. Welcome to Liberty and Friends.
Thank you, Sihle. Just a little bit under the weather. I'm on meds. I didn't want to ghost you for like another week. So, I thought I should come on.
Hey, man, we are eternally grateful, to you for joining us. And indeed, tonight's show perhaps won't be that long because some of the issues I want us to chew on are, let's just say they'll cause sparks. So I might have to manage that quite a bit. But nonetheless, with that being said, last but definitely not least is a chap who runs Paratus.Info. I always say it on the show that he is my go-to for all things self-defense, gun rights, and indeed creating a culture in this country of a citizenry that can defend itself and not be reliant on the state. He is, of course, Gideon. Joubert, there he is on screen. GJ, hello.
Sihle and all the other panelists and guests, good evening. And Ngijabulela Ukukwaz, my Zulu is not improving, but I at least managed to say that without stuttering. So it's going to be a banger tonight, I think. Lekker being here.
Absolutely. I love that little Zulu intro. I enjoyed that in particular because, as they say, Zulu is the language of the heavens. Anyway, moving on. I know we're not going to disagree on this one. Guys, thank you so much for everybody joining us. We were going to have one more participant, but he is in a, let's just say, a country that has massive restrictions on the internet. Hugo Kruger, but if he can join us during the course of this, we'll have Hugo Kruger on. Hugo Kruger, of course, is a writer, analyst, and a nuclear engineer. Definitely someone who I would want to be a part of this panel. With that being said, welcome to everybody. A reminder, please, to everybody who's watching the show here on Liberty and Friends, you are very much a part of the show. So please get your comments coming in thick and fast. Yeah, that's the expression. And they'll be flighted on screen. And if you have any questions for our panelists this evening, guys, as I said, your question or comment will be flighted on screen. This is Liberty and Friends. Guys, I'm going to struggle a little bit because I don't have my usual, file footage that really gives nice, deep context on a topic as we begin to chew on it. But let's begin here. Indeed, we were joking about it with Chris Wyatt earlier on. The damp squib, the flop, the moemish, as I like to call, that was the national shutdown. Oh, again, as I said in my Vuganazo episode, I see Chris came prepared there. It wasn't a, quote, national shutdown. It was more an EFF shutdown because the nation, if you will, turned back at these EFF guys and said, actually, F you guys, we're not shutting down. Chris, let me come to you on this one because, not only do you have the beret there, your thoughts, dude. I mean, especially as someone who may have been looking at this from the outside.
Well, Amandla! Oh, wait. Sorry, had to do that. Well, I'm calling you in tonight, calling in from Radio Red Beret. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate being a guest tonight. Listen, our Commander-in-Chief, exalted, wonderful Julius Malema, he called it, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. I was so impressed by the 2,100 people that showed up in Church Square in the largest demonstration in the country. What really struck me as the most exciting part of the National Shutdown Day was the 22 people in Jeffreys Bay. What a force! EFF, Viva EFF. Listen, a damn squib is an overstatement of what happened here. The second part of this question you're going to get to, but we got a big panel, so I'll talk about this now very quickly. Suddenly the SAPs can get it done. Yeah, but they're going to run out of steam very quickly, folks. You take the 197,000 officers, subtract supervisors, subtract mechanics, subtract secretaries, all that staff. You've got about 120,000 patrol officers, maybe, and that's in force. How many are sick? How many are home with HIV? How many have got TB? How many are this, that, and the other? How many are on vacation? If you're lucky, you get 45 to 50,000 cops on the street at a given time, and that's max. And during this event, they had more than that, so they overstressed themselves. So it would have been a good time for, gangsters to go out and steal things, 2 days after that, because you'd had short shifts, whether people notice or not. The EFF proved that they are not a force in South African politics. The only reason the EFF are a force in South African politics is because the corrupt media pimp them all the time. All the time. I've always said they're a 15% party max at national level, and these days they're dropping well below that. They're losing by-elections like shedding viral particles. Not impressed. And it's comical watching them, use old file footage of previous EFF marches, like during the lockdown in Pretoria and their march in Phoenix, and claiming thousands of people came out. Such frauds. But anyway, so there you go. So Viva EFF.
Yeah, I mean, on that last point you're making, it is actually desperately sad, because I must say this: I've got EFF people on my social media, the more reasonable ones, who don't just resort to name calling and slander.
They exist. They exist.
They are unicorns indeed.
Indeed.
But here are guys who are man enough, if I can use that expression, and not have the alphabet crew get very mad at me for saying
adult enough.
They're very mad at me for saying, it's kind of sad that here's this group which, yes, a couple of years ago could mobilize large numbers of individuals just for the spectacle of it. I mean, we know overall that the EFF are a sub 10%, or actually just over 10% party in terms of the vote share. But they also could mobilize massive numbers on the street, and they couldn't do that for a national shutdown. Gabriel, let me come to you, because this is where it gets really funny, and where perhaps with the latest polling that we've seen come out, people are beginning to, what's the word, that light bulb over the head, if you will, of
Eureka moment.
It could very well be possible that the EFF is heading for a between 6 and 8% polling, as the latest data from France Crenier's Social Research Foundation came out with this past week. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Sindile, thank you. I think that Chris is right to say that the EFF is got a 15% ceiling above its head, pretty much. That being said, the polling does suggest that it's dropped a little bit from its 11-12% position in the last elections. But that being said, I want to draw attention to something. On the Sunday night of the 19th of March, 196 buses that were bought and paid for by the EFF to transport between 10 and 20,000 people were cancelled. The letter is published online. That bus company said that basically we're worried about losing our government contracts if we go through with it. Even perhaps more significantly, the Bus Association of South Africa sent out a missive to say that any bus that is hired for the purpose of organizing or contributing to the organization of any of the shutdown events is going to be impounded. The logistical capacity of the EFF to coordinate large numbers of people was severely impinged by government action. I would say that this government action was legitimate. I would say that a lot of credit deserves to go to the Democratic Alliance, which launched an application for an interdict both against the shutdown and against events contributing to infringements of rights to do trade and business and go to school and university as you so wish. And the court rejected the overall appeal for the DA to cancel the shutdown, but gave an instruction to the EFF to say you can't get in the way of people going to business. You can't call for a shutdown of the country. You can't call for getting in the way of doing this and that. And that is part of what facilitated the cancelling of busing 20,000 people at least. There might have been far more buses that were cancelled. Furthermore, 23,400 tires were seized by the cops on the night before the event. Would like to know, how many street intersections can you shut down? How many zones of control can you establish with 24,000 tires? If you look at the 87 arrests by sunrise on the 20th of people who were contributing to moving around stuff preparatory to setting up barricades, people who were facilitating illegal action because no permits had been authorized for using public spaces for shutdown activities. I think that this is a situation where the EFF was shut down. I like that line. But I think we must be careful of underestimating the extent to which that required proactive engagement by political parties, by civil society, by the courts with that interdict. That was a special thing. I don't know that the EFF has been interdicted like that before from inciting violence, and by the cops following through. So to my mind, the headline message is that we still have the world's highest unemployment on record. We still have shrinking real GDP numbers. We still have cost of living threats coming from inflation. And I think the winter that lies ahead with the private sector strikes and the ways that the EFF can get through that and take advantage of that, not just the EFF, in order to keep turning the screws, using violent pressure to get their ways, is formidable. We mustn't underestimate how much of the challenge lies ahead. And I'll finish by saying this. The government employees got what they wanted. We have budgeted for a 4% wage increase. We're getting now, and according to Ernest Mabuza at the Sowetan, this was agreed on 17th March, just before the thing. The government agreed to push it to 7.5%. That means roughly 40 billion rand of unfunded government wage increases above inflation at a time when this country is kind of coming apart at the seams. That shutdown partly got its way because the government caved. And can I just say one last thing? I said the last thing, but one last thing, Sindile. Think about this, dude. Sindile, I think you know the story. Nicholas Lorimer alerted me to it. In February, our army nearly went on strike because they weren't going to be paid, because the air conditioning units for the servers that carry the payment information were being overstressed and underworked, and the tech guys said we need to shut down the computers so that we can replace the cooling system, and that means no one's going to be paid. And there was, that thing could have gone a very different way. So just imagine if we went into March with a striking army, with a lackluster and complacent attitude from the cops, civil society, the courts. I think that the EFF could have shut this thing down if they'd faced a complacent South Africa. I'm glad that they faced a fearsome response.
That's right.
I think that was part of what was necessary to make it a peaceful, unbloody Monday.
That's right. And Gabriel, that last point is actually very important. Sindile, I'm going to come to you, and then Gideon, I want you to really tackle the lion's share of this particular point around the response by law enforcement. And what we saw also were the preparations by private citizens, especially those who live in parts of South Africa that endured the July riots. There was a lot of organizing and a lot of organization from the public. I'll come to you on that point, Gideon, in a second. Sindile, that last point that Gabriel is raising is actually critically important, because there's two things I want to put to you, Sindile, I want you to chew on. It was very interesting to watch the South African Police Service, at the behest of President Cyril Ramaphosa, actually get their act together. It was maybe politically even a boon for the ANC, who had been seen as, and still are, by the way, and so people, please hear me right, but for that brief moment, there was a streak, an air of competence, which really actually buoyed people who had maybe been despondent towards the ANC, where people started asking the question, does it have to take EFF pressure for the government to get something right? And this is where I'm going to be slightly charitable, perhaps, towards the EFF, unaccustomed as I am to doing that. But does it have to take that kind of pressure for my comrades to get their act together? Or am I being too charitable, Sindile?
It makes me kind of think back to what happened during the 2010 World Cup. I think when the government feels a lot of external pressure, somehow they seem to get things done. So I think the problem with our government has a lot to do with apathy and a lack of conscientiousness. It's not that they don't have the ability to do whatever it is they need to do. And that's probably down and indicative as well to the local level. If you listen to people, for example, that work at municipalities, they'll tell you, I went in there, I tried to do my work, and somebody told me, no, slow down, you're going to make the rest of us look bad. So I think that's the real issue. The two big issues that we have in South Africa pertaining to the ANC is the lack of conscientiousness, is the sort of apathy. It's this thing of not caring. It's this thing of not, I'll get paid anyway. And I think part of that problem, and I think it goes back to what Gabriel said, is that the people in government, the public sector workers, always get their way. They get double-digit increases, they get whatever we want, and people in the private sector who are basically dragging this economy, they kind of have to take the back seat and simply support them. So I think that's what it really boils down to for me.
Even as you're saying that, I said there's two areas I want you to chew on. Even as you're saying that, a part of me is wondering, and again, it's a bit of an abstract view of this, but it was something I thought about because I was driving around Umlazi, my home township, at the time of this, and I can tell you now, Umlazi residents were saying, yay, we have never seen this level of visible policing. We've never seen this level of efficient integration of private security, of which the biggest private security in my township isn't like your ADT and, you know, sort of armed response. It's the taxi association's private security guys who are actively actually clearing the streets, removing tires. Anytime there's a little gaggle of EFF commies, they'll be like, hey, fusak, and, you know, these guys would scatter. There's some people who kind of started believing, could the ANC get this right? Should we support them again in 2024 if this is what we can expect from them?
My answer would be no, because I think they've been given all the chances. They've been given all of the chances that they could possibly have. I was also watching some of the stuff that Frans Cronje said when he was talking to Alec Hogg. The upside of all of this and the external pressure might be that the ANC softens in terms of just them getting their act together, them starting to do the right things. Because I think we're not guaranteed that any kind of coalition would win in 2024. But if the ideal situation would probably be that we kick them out. I don't think we should give them another chance because I think we, what's the saying about oh, yeah.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
There you go. Thank you very much. There we go.
Let me come to Gideon, because, dude, as I said, ahead of this shutdown by the EFF, you know, before, of course, we knew that it was going to be the damn squib that it was, there was serious levels of coordination, organizing by South Africans, especially those of us, as I said, who lived through the July riots last year. People were almost, as I like to say in Zulu English, we were koratu, putting up barricades and, you know, even manning our own streets. Let me be precise and specific. You know, let's go beyond, you know, the formal private security in this country. There are groupings of individuals who wear reflected vests here in my township. They're called Amaforum. They belong to forums who man different neighborhoods. And these guys were basically saying, hey, man, if we see any commies in our area, it's going to be business. And again, I'm not saying this because I condone violence, but there is a palpable what's the word? A distaste, if you will, for anarchy or those who are potentially opening the door to anarchy because of that looting memory, which is still fresh in our minds. Your thoughts, Gideon? Brother, you're muted. Let me just unmute you. Let's see if it's... Go ahead.
Here we go. Sorry, there's a lot to unpack, so I'll try and keep it brief. But I think something that must be borne in mind is that, yes, there is definite credit we can give to the South African Police Service and the government's response. That said, there's a very big difference between planning a public order policing response in advance to a well-advertised sort of single-day mass action event versus actually doing proper, competent, just law enforcement on a daily basis. And I mean, we know for a fact that the South African Police Service can dismantle and destroy the gangs tomorrow, put their leadership in prison, successfully prosecute them, and end violence on the Cape Flats through the application of a special unit and some political will. The problem is, there are two things here. The political will to actually tackle violent crime, especially organized crime in South Africa, clearly doesn't exist. The second part, which is more worrying, is the constant connections we see between high-ranking politicians in the ANC and the organized criminal industry. That means that there's a certain vested interest in that party with organized crime, and therefore that's not being taken on. So we mustn't conflate the two issues together. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that the national shutdown was taken to pieces by the government with the extensive support of a huge, one of the biggest private sector security industries in the world that was fully mobilized for this event, as well as civilian community safety structures and institutions. And the one heartening thing, actually not the one, there were two very good things that came from this. So one is I saw several communications between cluster commanders and station commanders and their local CPFs and neighborhood watches, where they essentially said to the guys, listen, we're going to put some restrictions on you, but these are going to be advisory restrictions. They're not going to be restrictions where if you break them, we're going to arrest you. We're just going to sort of discipline you as members of the CPF. But there was an incredibly close cooperation and coordination between the private role players and the police. I have to give huge kudos to the city of Cape Town and the other DA municipalities that use their municipal resources very effectively and responsibly as well. Before this, we saw excellent work from them. And I think that is to a large degree why the security response was as effective as it was. There's great coordination between all the available resources. There was no egocentric chest thumping from the state. And there was also something that was, you know, when people get court orders against rioters, I'm one of the first cynics to go, oh, what the heck is that piece of paper going to do? Because we've seen it just being ignored so many times. This time it was a bit different. There were numerous arrests of people violating those court interdicts, like numerous. And that was a refreshing new thing in a way that happened. It's a case of, okay, so interdicts have teeth now. And there was also a court order in favor of, I think it was the Property Owners Association, which the fourth paragraph of the order, I'm going to read to you quickly, has big implications. It says the South African Police Services, alternatively, any duly registered private security contractor, further alternatively, the appropriate sheriff of the High Court, be and hereby authorized to assist any of the members of the applicant, therefore any of the Property Association's members, in enforcing prayers 2 and 3 of this order, prayers 2 and 3 obviously pertaining to the protection of property. Meaning that with this order, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can read, okay? Essentially, private security has been granted powers pretty much on par with the South African Police Service in enforcing this court order. That is a big thing. That is a very big admission from the court pertaining the capacity of the SAPs, and there's a bit of a reality there. That said, on a lighter note, my favorite thing about the national shutdown was Judith's speech in front of Cyril's house, where he said Fikile Mbalula has the mind of a rat and he will not understand anything. That was just top tier. Like, I fully agree with that.
Well, one can call that a cheesy comment. But moving on, shitty puns aside, Chris, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I want to play something. Because I warned the EFF types ahead of this particular shutdown of theirs. And I said, guys, if you continue intimidating South Africans, not only are they not going to support you on when your shutdown eventually comes, they are actively going to hunt you. Or I shouldn't say that. Let me rephrase. They're actively going to defend themselves from you. That's actually what I really meant when I said hunt you, in the sense of if you antagonize or intimidate them, they'll go after you. They're not going to back down. They'll go after you. And sure enough, almost as if on cue, This happened as a group of EFF individuals stormed allegedly some offices trying to shut down those offices. Look at how the employees there responded. Give me a second, guys, for this to load because I'm not using my usual system. And even as I'm doing that, remember, guys, hit that like button. Do it now, please, whilst you're waiting on this little clippy to play. I'm going to play that again because y'all might have missed that. Have a look at the guys on the absolute far left. Excuse the pun. Now, again, I play that not because I'm condoning violence or the like, but I play that as a reality check to what I said in the previous week on Vuganazo, Chris, is that the EFF, through its revolutionary theory, ideology, excuse me, live in this echo chamber, where in this echo chamber, Julius Malema is the loudest voice. Whatever Julius Malema says is reality. You have these red beret, sort of red in tooth and claw commie supporters believing that nonsense, even though reality says something different. And that reality literally met the EFF on the day with a thud or a nice right hook, as you saw there. And that's not the only incident, by the way, where you saw the public and even the police coming into confrontation, violent and physical confrontation against the intimidation of the EFF. Is there a changing mood, a less, what's the word, Chris, tolerance for being intimidated by commies in this country? You're muted, Chris. Let me do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the host had me muted. I had to wait. I can mute
Not
myself.
Not bad.
It's okay. I can mute myself. When this isn't read anymore, then I'm... Anyway, I don't always remember it. So that's a great apropos video to bring in to mention a number of things. Number one, look, I don't advocate violence either, which some people may find ironic, spending 36 years in uniform, multiple combat tours, but that's the last thing we want. That's hopefully deterrence works. But seeing that guy get moored was that was something else. I'm not going to advocate for it, but I'm just going to say it was pretty entertaining to say the least. But listen, here's the bottom line that people should take from this entire episode. And I'm going to come back to the bus thing very quickly too in a second. But the EFF is only the EFF so long as the ANC enables them. And this was proven on this event. If the ANC doesn't enable them, allow them to break the law, to intimidate people, to commit domestic acts of terrorism at cliques with petrol bombs and burn farms down the Free State, then they have no power. People aren't interested in them. Their rhetoric is nonsense. It's rhetoric. And they show just what panty-wade, little frightened cowards most of them are. I'm going to tell you, if retirees had stood up with their canes at a cliques location in mass, they would have run away. 12-year-old girls would frighten most EFF crowds away. That's the truth. Anytime someone stands up to them, they run like cockroaches. That's what they do. That's what they do. Anytime anybody stands up to them. But they're only relevant so long as the ANC enables and or tolerates them. And on this occasion, they weren't going to tolerate them. And so I don't give credit to now. I think Gideon is correct about Cape Town, a couple of the locations. Excellent job. And also in the private sector, excellent job coordinating and being prepared for this. But again, had 2 months of preparation. I mean, he announced this 2 months ago. But I don't really give them credit because they weren't really challenged. The government, the SAPs were never really challenged. I mean, knocking a few heads and picking a few people up late at night on the street the night before is not tens of thousands. It isn't Soweto in 1976. It isn't Soweto in 1985. And oh, by the way, Big Daddy Liberty, you were there, brother. You were at Senegal. They bust in thousands of people there to break up all the rubbish bins and rip down the Afrikaan street signs. They managed that a couple years ago, but that's the extent of what they can do. They can do Phoenix with 4,000 people. They can do 6,000 people violating lockdown rules in Pretoria to protest for the Sputnik and the Chinese spicy cough jab. But they can't organize a national thing because it's not a nationally powerful party. And again, back to your first point here, and that is that people have had enough. They've had enough of the ANC, but they've also had enough of the EFF. And this is what I tell South Africans of all stripes, black, white, and brown. I'm sick of people dividing yourselves. So many of you self-divide yourselves. South Africans, by and large, are conservative people, by and large. And you have much in common, whether you're Xhosa, Zulu, Venda, Afrikaner, Portuguese, Tawana, it doesn't matter. Stop the nonsense, work together against these ghouls, and you will see success. This country is waiting to blossom and flourish and lift these kids out of pit latrines and get proper educations. It just takes people working together. But the bus thing, Gabriel is right about the bus thing. The government crowing about it on the first day. Oh, we shut them down. That's essentially what the new transport minister said. Then she denied it. We didn't have an impact. Well, you did. But even with the 169 buses they claim they had, and then later Malema and Church Square said, or after the interview, he said it was 260. Even that's only 15,600 seats on buses. That's not going to get it done around a country that has 60 million people. So they managed to they can do it on a limited basis. They're not a threat nationally, and people have had enough, I think, by and large, and they're not going to put up with it, especially if you tell them in advance. You tell them we're coming, they're going to be ready for it, and you're going to get moored.
And what I really found funny here, and Sindile, I'm going to come to you because there's a political fallout here that I want you to chew on for me, please. Chris is absolutely spot on. When there is, and Gideon also spot on in his assessment, when the EFF face resistance, it falls apart. The biggest, how do I frame this? I think the taxi guys coming out and saying, listen, if you mess with our routes, if you mess with our employees rather, trying to serve the public, going about their work, you'll find us. And you'll find us in only the way taxi guys can make a polite threat, in their press releases. I think that really shook up perhaps even EFF members, Sindile, who questioned why they were doing this. Why are they doing this when the people who supposedly Malema tells them they represent, because again, there's that whole notion by leftist black nationalists that they represent the masses or the black disenfranchised portions of society. But Sindile, when those very people tell you that if you come and threaten us, you'll see a shambok side of us, it becomes a bit of it burst a certain bubble, didn't it, of EFF, and really weakened Malema's projection of their party being of the quote-unquote masses.
You know what? I think one of the misconceptions that feeds into sort of this overinflated view of the EFF in the media is a lack of understanding of how people think. For example, in rural areas, in townships, people like order in South Africa. So you would know this, Sihle. So for example, if somebody comes from the rural areas, you say, Ukona umthetho. There's a way of doing things that produces order. And people, if you talk to people from rural areas and townships, they'll tell you, okay, we understand when we're here in the rural areas, there's a certain order, there's chiefs, there's etc., etc. There's a power structure. When you go to town, ukona umthetho welizwe, there's an order that comes from rules that come from government. So South Africans fundamentally, by and large, are actually ordered people. A lot of what happens in terms of the disorder and the chaos is people taking advantage of the social conditions. So the EFF really, what they do are manipulators of people's frustrations, which are caused by poor policy and the ANC's just poor governance, so on and so forth. So fundamentally speaking, anybody who wants to speak to South Africans has to be able to understand that and understand that there is a sense of order. So when people come and they say, we will shambok you, it comes from a sense of order that South Africans have. Like, look, dude, we've got to get to work. There's inflation biting us, because poor people understand inflation better than most people because they're on a knife edge when it comes to money. When things go up and people can't go to work and they can't feed their kids and they can't do stuff, then they get upset. And the EFF fundamentally was getting in the way. The EFF kind of has inhaled, they've created this myth of themselves, and then they've kind of inhaled themselves and just brought and inflated their own ego. But in actual fact, in reality, they're not in touch with the people on the ground. So I think already, in terms of what actually stops the EFF from growing and becoming a bigger party, it's that thing about them. It's that thing of actually not understanding that people want order, people want jobs, people want things that work.
And yes, Sindile,
yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right, Sindile. And Gabriel, let me come to you. Let me just come to you to conclude the section. Gabriel, there's a series of tweets, a thread that a good friend of ours, or former colleague, I should rather say, of ours, Gareth van Onsling, did ahead of this particular shutdown, where he broke down the politics of this all. Indeed, I used that as the basis of the comments I made on my episode on this particular issue ahead of the shutdown. That is, one shouldn't be dribbled and shouldn't be distracted. There is an iterative relationship between the ANC and the EFF, which we've kind of spoken of here tonight, where the EFF lives, it thrives of the misery created by the ANC's bad policy that places South Africans at a disadvantage economically, socially, and the like, and obviously creates a frustration in the public, which the EFF then tries to capitalize on, and Sindile rightly says, tries to appropriate the emotion of it in order to then drive a revolutionary agenda. Because remember, the EFF are not parties that, the EFF, pardon me, are not a party that believes in reform and building consensus and changing society gradually by building a pool of people who can see a single way forward. No. They believe in revolutionary theory. The idea that you can use even violence to drastically change something in order to insert themselves as the what Marx called the vanguard of the poor, the vanguard of the proletariat. This is this what we saw perhaps on Monday play out? That reality versus that theory, if you will, clash, and that relationship between the ANC and EFF?
Absolutely. I think one way to notice it is this. After the riots, Uncle President started going back to riding his favorite hobby horse, which is to say that the real source of the problems in South Africa is our constitution. And we need to reevaluate the constitution he helped draft. This is code for expropriation without compensation. It's code for doubling down on BEE. It's code for basically taking the property rights, civil rights, non-racial framework that South Africa is supposed to be running on, cracking it and letting the national democratic revolution come in through the seams. You said that the EFF is not into reform, it's into revolution. The ANC's official policy since Morogoro 50 years ago, ratified every year of the last 20, is national democratic revolution. The Umrabula documents make it very clear. In the last one that I read the whole way through of 2020, I think it was, it said the R in NDR does not stand for reform. It stands for revolution. The problem with South Africa, the sickness is not corruption, it is capitalism. For capitalism is what breeds corruption, and the only cure is communism. And if you think I'm making it up, I invite you to read it for yourself. I think that the pivot is also beneficial to Ramaphosa in this way. None of us so far have talked about two things that are worth noting. Firstly, Pala. Yes, Chris is mouthing it. The EFF has a very real complaint against Cyril Ramaphosa. The other is load shedding, which magically has started to dissolve. And someone was mentioning that interview France did. I agree that we might be looking at a very interesting stretch of South Africa's resources to make load shedding go away and the build up to the next election, and then a rapid return to the worst of it thereafter, because it'll be taken away in an unsustainable fashion. But be that as it may, notice this. Ramaphosa has never looked so good, despite the fact that the EFF was going after him after an impeachment vote. An investigation was quashed by his own party with a split vote in the party. A subsequent call for just answering some questions was put down. Suddenly he looks good despite all of that. That is the gift that the EFF has given him. You know, if they'd managed to stoke looting and mad action, that would have been good, because the ANC could come in afterwards and try and clean up the mess and say, look, we have to change the constitution. We have to pursue the NDR because that's the only way to keep stability. Alternatively, they keep the peace and they look good because they can show what they've done. But contrast this in terms of the political analysis. Yes, the EFF and the ANC have effectively helped the EFF has effectively helped the ANC in this news cycle, and a meta news cycle. This is one that'll stick for a while. But look at the contrast. In February, or was it January 26? January 26, the Democratic Alliance had a protest. They try to organize around the country. The biggest one was in Johannesburg, in the CBD, against load shedding. And the idea was to march to Lutuli House. And there were about 5,000-6,000 people there. I was on the ground. I was interviewing people on the ANC side, on the DA side. And the DA spoke in big terms. You know, they said, this is going to be the start of the 2024 election campaign. This is going to be the start of a great movement to end load shedding. And they've got a pragmatic solution to get us there. But they needed other political parties to join the thing, to have another protest the next week with 10,000 people, then another one with 20,000 people, the way the Zuma Must Fall protest happened. You know what happened? No one got behind them. And on the 29th of January, 3 days later, Julius Malema announced this March 20 shutdown. And he tried to build it up slowly, and in the end, he was crushed. But these parties are both vying for a very obvious prize, which is to get South Africans to blame load shedding, to blame bad service delivery, the world's highest unemployment on record, terrible crime rates, murder rates that are increasing, to blame it on the ANC and to vote in a new party come 2024. And the EFF failed. And I hate to say it, but it's true. The DA failed as well, because that protest came and it went away. And we are sitting in a situation where the EFF is making the ANC look very good. And the DA, or the opposition more broadly, shall I say, with people not getting behind each other and the petty squabbles and the dissolution of Joubert, the opposition is also making the ANC look very good too. And I think right now, the call that the ANC might get to 50% in 2024 might reverse its decline. That is a real possibility. That possibility is back on the table. And you know why Cyril's talking about amending the constitution? Because the possibility of the ANC getting 52 and the EFF getting 9 and then 80 and then a few other small parties getting 4 or 5 and them together getting 66. That thing hasn't gone away either. Even if they're so useless at driving through their agenda this year to change the constitution, if the opposition to the National Democratic Revolution doesn't get its act together, you could have a 2/3 majority sitting in the hands of the National Democratic Revolution in 2024. So a thing to think about.
And this is where it gets very disappointing. Guys, I just must do a bit of housekeeping here. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. My name is Usihle Ngobese, your favorite fat boy, Big Daddy Liberty. In the house tonight, of course, is Chris Wyatt, of course, of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. There he is, right next to moi. And of course, Gabriel Crouse from the South African Institute of Race Relations. He just gave us a bit of sage and rather depressing analysis there of what could be possibly where the politics plays out in 2024. Gideon Joubert of Paratus.Info. There he is at the bottom there. And Sindile Vabaza, who of course is a writer and analyst. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Please hit that like button. A very strong audience tonight, but my likes are nowhere near where they should be. Guys, hit that like button, please. It really helps spread this show. With that being said, guys, I must move us on. Just because of time. But you know, with that being said, dear viewer, pardon me, I forgot to mention, get your comments coming in thick and fast. I'm putting them on the screen. Guys, let's head over into the international space now, where, again, as South Africans, we can be blamed at times of not paying attention to what's happening in the world around us, even though it has massive implications for not only our this country, but also global peace. Let's talk, of course, about a certain country that belongs to a coalition, an alliance, if you will, that South Africa is a part of. I'm talking, of course, about Brazil, Russia, India, and China. That's the BRICS alliance. Very interesting things on that front, insofar as the Chinese raising their voices on the issue of the war between Russia and the Ukraine. Let me just put this on screen just for reference. As I'm doing that, I'm struggling to do it. Please hit that like button, please. There it is, share screen. Of course, there's the heading right there. China calls for a ceasefire and peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, basically on the 1-year anniversary of this particular conflict. The Chinese stepping in and saying, actually, what they would prefer as another massive superpower in the region is for this to end in peaceful resolution. Enough with the arming of both sides and fueling of the conflict. Let me just read these first two paragraphs, and I'll throw it to the panel. China, of course, is calling for a ceasefire in Ukraine and for peace talks as soon as possible in a much anticipated position paper released on the first anniversary of the Russian invasion. As Russia's war in Ukraine enters its second year, Beijing is pushing harder for a negotiated end to the war. It's been reportedly suggested it would be willing to, quote, broker any ceasefire negotiations, a proposal that Ukrainians are said to be wary of because of China's close association with Moscow. Now, with that being said, let me actually show you a short clip, guys, very quickly, as to where that opposition is coming from. That is opposition to the Chinese being the peace brokers in this particular matter. To do that, I just need to shut that down and get rid of that. There we go. That's one little piggy. And get to this clip. This, of course, is the spokesperson, one of the government spokesperson of the US administration under the Biden administration, speaking on a news segment as the news, of course, of the Chinese brokering peace came through. Listen to him oppose this and, of course, give his rationale for why the Biden administration is not keen on the Chinese being peace brokers.
That if coming out of this meeting there's some sort of call for a ceasefire, well, that's just going to be unacceptable, because all that's going to do, Mike, is ratify Russia's conquest to date. All that's going to do is give Mr. Putin more time to refit, retrain, reman, and try to plan for renewed offensives at a time of his choosing. We hope, and we've said this before, that President Xi will call and talk to President Zelensky, because we believe the Chinese need to get the Ukrainian perspective here.
Mm-hmm. All right, there you have it. You'll forgive me, his name, I've lost the notes that had his name on it due to a glitch.
Rear Admiral Kirby.
There we go. Chris, I was actually going to come to you on this particular issue because I don't know where you actually stand on it, but there's two distinct questions here insofar as the involvement now, and seemingly a very active involvement being proposed by the Chinese themselves to broker peace. Your thoughts on this, and of course, the US opposition?
First off, the Chinese interest in peace is a red herring. One needs only look at how this war came about in the first place. We saw Putin travel to Moscow and meet with Xi and get guarantees to buy Russian timber, Russian petroleum, Russian minerals, and also lines of credit so that they would be able to withstand Western sanctions should they go to war with Ukraine. So I find it highly comical to see the Chinese. What is happening here, in my view, is an absence of the Biden regime on the global stage, a geostrategic negligence on their part. The Chinese, seeing yet another opportunity to throw their weight around, have stepped in, because where are the peace proposals? For the past 18 months, well, it's not been 18 months, 15 months, whatever it is, we've seen Joe, actually you go back before that when he was stoking the war, there's going to be a war, there's going to be a war, when his popularity hit 28%. The Biden regime has been stoking this proxy war along with Jens Stoltenberg and NATO, trying to push this conflict. They've done nothing to stop it, nothing to go back to the Minsk agreement, no efforts to rein in Volodymyr Zelensky's anti-Russian behavior, his discrimination against the Orthodox Church, his banning of Russian in spoken language there, even though a third of the population is Russian. This violates the United Nations Human Rights Declaration and many other things. The Biden regime is fighting a proxy war there for whatever the reasons, most of which I think are distraction. We're not talking about Hunter. We're not talking about the Biden regime bankrupting the richest country in the world. This year's proposed budget is $6.9 trillion. The 2000 budget 23 years ago was 1.8 trillion in total. 1.8 trillion. Do we have 380% more governance or better governance than we had 23 years ago? No, we have 380% more oppression at home and abroad. This is absolutely ridiculous. The deficit in that 6.9 trillion budget is 1.9 trillion, larger than the entire federal government's expenditure 23 years ago. And someone's going to say, but Chris, what about inflation? 2% inflation over the last 15 years does not equal 383%. I'm sorry. I'm kind of common core math you're using. It doesn't work that way. So to me, this is the Chinese stepping into a vacuum, and they're smart. Hey, if I was Xi, I'd do it too. I don't think they're even remotely serious about peace there, because they're making a fortune. They're making a fortune off of Russia's war, because Russia's selling the material they need. They don't have to worry about getting it in Africa and dealing with despot regimes and making dirty deals and getting bad press. So it works out pretty well for them. From my view, China is simply stepping into a vacuum, a dearth of leadership by a corrupt, inept, moronic, unable to climb the steps, demented lunatic who runs my nation into the ground. And I think I've been rather reserved in my comments.
The views expressed by Chris Wyatt are not those of the big. I'm just kidding. But no, look, I'm going to come back to you, Chris, because I know there will be some disagreement on this and the associated issue. But I want us to separate issues just for a moment, because we'll get to the ever-increasing relationship, the cozying up between China and the Russians, and of course, seemingly a shift by other nations around the world away from that sort of US traditional, the West type, for the lack of a word right now, I'll call it alliance, or, to a more sort of friendlier towards Russia and China thing. We'll get to that in a moment. So guys, just hold those thoughts for now. Let's just focus just for the next 5-8 minutes or so on this, the Chinese seemingly raising their voice. Gabriel, Chris saying the Chinese are basically raising their voice only because they recognize there is a vacuum. Now, let's look at who we're talking about here. Here's Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, who's just recently buoyed off of an election victory. Now, say what you will about that election victory, dubious as it was in its nature, but nonetheless, here's a guy who's basically on the top of the world when it comes to his Chinese politics, now saying, maybe the next chapter of Chinese politics is further expansion, if you will, of the Chinese brand of international diplomacy, and even wading into areas where the Americans are seemingly making a mess of things. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll add one reason to suspect that the Chinese, at least that Beijing, that Xi himself is not that interested in peace, is that I think the word on the street that NATO is to some extent depleting its resources by donating to Ukraine at a faster rate than they're replenishing does encourage that part of Xi's administration that would like to take a chance at a military takeover of Taiwan with the least possible resistance coming from the so-called West. So if China can sit and watch this war play out for another 4 years, and NATO keeps donating, but not replenishing, their stocks can be low enough, they can be exhausted enough by the end of that the Chinese might think that they've got a better chance at Taiwan. I'm not sure that that's a good calculation. I'm not at all trying to, but it's a reason to I think that in a way China is winning. I don't know who else is winning, but China does seem to be winning the war in Ukraine. So I'm not sure they wanted to stop. In terms of getting involved in filling vacuums, of course, there's also Saudi Arabia. The renewal of formal diplomatic relations between the Saudis and the Iranians. I think on the back of promises to withdraw support for the Houthi rebels in Yemen is a deal brokered by China successfully, which is not of the same order as the Abraham Accords, which was a very, very impressive deal. But I do think it's a serious PR win for the Chinese. It's a serious soft power gain. It's clearly come on the back of cooling relations between the Saudis and the Yanks in the face of tensions about how to deal with the sort of Middle Eastern politics, as well as politics bleeding into the Ukraine-Russia situation. So to my mind, at a very high level, I think it's appropriate to say that we're in the second Cold War. I've sort of had that feeling for a while. And I think that it's a great tragedy that democracies like Russia, ultimately, and India are being alienated from their most natural allies, which are democracies in NATO and in Japan, South Korea, and so on. I think that containment is the right strategy to approach the one-party totalitarian state of China. I think we all do well if the Chinese people do well. There's a lot of great people there, but the administration is of a form that poses a kind of risk. And the off-ramp for something better in China is just, I don't think, any closer. I think it's a little bit further away as China gains greater influence and as Washington as an effective broker, deal maker, peacekeeper, and so on retreats. I'm not sure that, I'll leave it at that. I definitely worry about this.
And I'll come back to the two of you, but because I'm just keeping an eye on time. So let me introduce that second aspect of the same topic as I throw it to Gideon and Sindile, but everybody will get a bite of this apple again, guys. Let's just take our time here, guys. And maybe at this point, let me just ask the panel just for an extra 15 minutes at the end. I know I usually do this when it's the end of the usual, but I'm just sensing that this can get quite meaty as we begin to look at the meat and potatoes of it all. Gideon, let me come to you, and I want to play a clip. I obviously began the segment by saying the voice of the Chinese, especially buoyed after Xi Jinping's recent election once again, is definitely getting louder. It's definitely, as Gabriel pointed out, playing itself out in other diplomatic areas around the world. For instance, he brought up that Saudi-Iran example, which I was going to bring up a bit later. But I actually want to bring it up insofar as the second element associated with it, which is the relationship between the Chinese and the Russians. Actually, we've got to pay attention to it. It's strengthening. And these two leaders themselves are basically saying, hey, oh, pardon me, that kombucha came back. These two leaders themselves are saying, hey, we need to actually begin to quite openly and purposefully create a new world order. And I'm not using that expression to get the conspiracy theorists in my comment section riled up, but I'm using it in the actual sense of that word, where the Chinese and the Russians are saying, hey, we've got the power to do this. We're being squeezed by the West. The West is fumbling on certain things. Maybe it's time that we raise something. So give me a second, guys. Let me play this clip. I just want to show you this recent visit. Get rid of this. Sorry, guys. So many ads here. Even as I open this, come on, open up. As I said, the president of China, Xi Jinping, recently actually visited Russia, held a series of high-level meetings there, all sorts of deals being ratified. But again, it was some of the off-the-cuff comments that were made by these two gentlemen as they extolled the virtues of each other that really sent cold shivers, if I can put it that way, down the current establishment around what these two guys are perhaps planning. Let me quickly read from this piece from the Foreign Policy Journal, basically asking that question: what does Xi's visit, that's the president of China, to Russia mean for the world? I've just lost the section. There it is. Obviously, it's done in an interview format, to which one of the respondents, the expert on the issue, says, apart from this, Putin's motivation for the meeting is easy to explain. He's now an international pariah, but this was an opportunity for him to show that he's still accepted by the leaders of the world's second most powerful country, even if it's increasingly seen, that is Russia, as a vassal state. Now, as for Xi himself, the president of China, his motivations are more puzzling. His embrace of Putin and deepening of ties with Russia will further damage China's image in Europe and the, quote, free world. In an interesting juxtaposition, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida was in Kiev at the same time. That's, of course, the capital of Ukraine. And the paired visits were a poignant symbol and a substantive reminder of how Beijing and Tokyo's regimes' current alignment choices are roughly the reverse of their World War II positions, end of quotes. Very interesting quotes, that one, basically just trying to get a sense of what each of the motivations are around this. But Gabriel, I must throw it to you, dude. These two chaps, it's if you're someone who perhaps was not ready or didn't think BRICS would turn into anything of substance, of value, seeing these two leaders get together and basically say, let's reorder, if you will, global diplomacy. Let's collect, if you will, the many dissatisfied, rather, countries with the current status quo, is sending cold shivers down the spines of many.
Yeah, I think it's right. I mean, I think that BRICS was often ridiculed as a term because it was made fun of. Some consultant at McKinsey coined it because it sounded clever. But I think it is the case that it's an exaggeration to say that Russia is a vassal state of China. Its economy is more autarkic. I think if anything, China, it's often been pointed out, would be in probably bigger trouble vis-a-vis sanctions, because it's not as good at supplying its own basic needs. Partly because it's kind of a more integrated, sophisticated part of the global economy. That being said, it's just worth noting the following thing about BRICS. So there's the Russia-China connection, and the biggest question mark there is China going to experiment with giving or selling Russia arms at scale? Right now, the war's not going to end, no matter what anyone says about ceasefires, partly because NATO needs to figure out if the spring offensive is going to work. There needs to be a test of the arms that they've been given. A war is a laboratory center, and people want to know. And I don't think that they're going to miss that opportunity. China might be tempted to want to know what its arms look like in the battlefield too. On the other hand, as long as it's not selling, it's got a sort of moral higher ground that it can say, look, you guys are funding the war, we're trying to stay out. Another interesting relationship in BRICS is the Russia-India relationship, where India, the world's largest democracy, did not vote to condemn the invasion, the full-scale invasion, did not vote again in the UN at the end of last year to condemn. The Indian position is, I think, a slightly more promising one, because I think that country has a lot more growth potential. It's obviously also winning from the war in the sense that it's able to buy oil at a subsidized rate because of the sanctions on Russian oil and Russia selling oil to. But that that RIC, the RIC in BRICS, I think is very serious. I think without Russia being able to sell as much oil as it is to India and having its prestige support, or at least non-condemnation, and with the notion around that the world's second largest economic power is sort of not so keen on the Ukraine, is not so keen on condemning the Russian side. That does shift things. I think the really scary stuff, though, is when you go down the scale of this alliance. It's the Teherans, it's the what's going on in Venezuela. Those allies, there's nothing good to my mind about emboldening the regime in Tehran. And that is what Russia's doing. That is what's happening with the legitimization of these relations. I think it's very worrying to have the Iranian government not yet reformed, but getting closer to having nuclear power and having more clients and more clout. That's just, to me, that seems like a very dangerous situation that's bolstered by the longer this plays out.
Let me bring Gideon in here. Sorry, I actually meant to come to you, Gideon. My bad earlier on. But like Gabriel does raise good points though here that I wanted to chew on, because I saw some of the stuff you're tweeting, Gideon, and I want to latch on to something Chris said. There is a vacuum being created here by the American, I don't know what to call it, just the vapid.
Let's call it what it is, a strategic failure. And
Go ahead, bro.
I did not come up with that term. That's from a superb book by a chap called Mark Moya called Strategic Failure. He wrote in 2015. The subscript is How President Obama's Drone Warfare, Defense Cuts, and Military Amateurism Have Imperiled America. And he actually, on page 247, the chapter that starts there is Dangerous Nations, near the end of the book, warns on exactly the business playing out on the world stage as we see it now. That's Russia intensifying the conflict in the Ukraine, China making moves on Taiwan, as well as other sort of contested areas in Asia and the South China Sea. Pretty much most of the stuff he was concerned about near the end of this book have come to pass. I mean, there was a bit of a break in the strategic failure during the Trump administration, and that's all subsequently, I think, been reversed. And the best explanation I received about why we're sitting with the situation in Eastern Europe that we're sitting is not because Russia is very different to us, but Russia is actually a Western nation. It's a bit envious. That's why it buys football teams in Britain. That's why it consumes Western consumer goods rather conspicuously. It wants to be part of the club. It wants to be led into, after the Cold War, it wants to be part of this bigger Western hemisphere. And it's tried very hard, after alcoholic Boris Yeltsin, to kind of become part of that. and not always in the best way, but as opposed to kind of embracing them and drawing them kind of in and say, listen, tap them on the shoulder. You boys are doing okay. You have a long way to go, but let's talk. There's been distrust and rejection, and that did not play well politically. It's probably a controversial thing for me to say, but it's generally something that I seem to, it makes sense. So now what we have is complete alienation between the West and Russia, but complete. You have America that's trying very hard to do all the heavy lifting in NATO because none of the other member states seem to give a toss about their obligations pertaining the alliance regarding military spending. A handful of them are. I think the Greeks actually and the Turks are the only ones doing particularly well there, and probably the French, but the Germans are certainly not. And you've got, you have everything going wrong the way it is go wrong and escalating the way it's escalating because there's a humongous vacuum. The Biden administration seems to just be adding fuel to the fire and flailing around blindly. They don't seem to have any real geopolitical strategy. And while this is going on, the Chinese are completely outplaying them, not because the Chinese are necessarily particularly brilliant, but because America isn't pitching with its A game in the Middle East and in Africa and in Latin America, and the Chinese are. And that is worrying to me because, as Gabriel points out, we can have difference of opinion on Russia because I think there's a lot to be said about this, loves. The one-party state that is China deeply worries me. We've seen what they did to Hong Kong, right? They just ran right over the basic civil rights of those people. The West did nothing except sit in its hands and post memes. What was done to Hong Kong can very easily be done to Taiwan without having to fire a single shot. All you have to do is blockade that island. And it's a problem. Whether or not a blockade would succeed, that's up for debate. But it's a case of we have China flexing harder every subsequent cycle and kind of testing the waters, and they're not getting a lot of pushback. And they're expanding their soft power campaign. And they are not it's not the same dealing with the one-party CCP as it is dealing with slightly opaque democratic Slavs, right? So I am concerned.
Let me come in here because you're raising some good points. And that last comment in particular about China's influence in Africa and Latin America in particular should be something that the Americans themselves should be sitting up and paying attention to, especially because the presidents of some of these nations are beginning to openly speak out against Americans, including, by the way, the Mexican president. Now, who you'd expect, with the United States of America and Mexico being neighbors, that these two would have a solid relationship. Obviously, administrations change, but you'd expect, broadly speaking, these two to be closer bosom buddies. I want to just quickly put something on screen. Sindile, I am coming to you on this particular one, especially the influence of China in Africa. Booty, I want your take on that. But this one was very interesting for me, and I saw these comments by the Mexican president as I just try and load them on the screen. Please bear with me, dear viewers. Even as I say this, please hit that like button as you're watching Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Share screen. Mexican president. There it is. You can see the heading there. I think it's loading on screen. Mexican president calls out U.S. hypocrisy, questioning how Biden can talk about human rights. Now, as he says this, it was at a press conference about 4 or 5 days ago. The president of Mexico, of course, or president of AMLO, sorry, Manuel Lopez Obrador, has voiced his support for Donald Trump as he calls out the hypocrisy by the U.S. During a press conference, he said that Biden's administration should not be discussing cartel violence and Mexico following journalist Seymour Hersh's report that Biden authorized the 2022 attack on the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, he says a whole bunch of other stuff too, raises the fact that, how can America criticize us on human rights when they, for example, are jailing journalists, and basically speaks about Assange, hapata. There's a lot raised. The point, though, was the brazenness, the openness, if you will, of someone who should be the ally of the US speaking out against it. And there are many examples of this. One can cite the Ugandans, for instance, right now, a separate matter, of course, but the passing of their anti-gay legislation. America coming down and saying, with a threat, of course, that, oh, we'll withhold aid for you passing this law, and the Ugandans basically saying, suck it, we don't care. Again, these are small examples of what can be described as a growing culture of people saying, we don't need you, America, or we're not afraid, rather, of voicing this disillusion with the America, because perhaps, and I'm saying the word perhaps, Sindile, they're looking to this Russia, China, India, and Brazil alliance as something that could be something of the future. I mean, I say this even as the Saudi Arabians are basically applying to be part of BRICS. Sindile?
I think for me, I'm trying to get my head around this whole thing, because I've been listening to this geopolitical expert called Peter Zahan lately. And I wonder if all of this isn't something to do with the dying embers of the Pax Americana. I often wonder if America actually has the appetite to be the world's police, to be the people that sort of maintain order in the world. I think that's a question for me. I think the other thing is that I often think there's a perception in the global South that America is not an honest broker, because I think America was pretty effective in galvanizing the West towards, for example, Ukraine's cause. But I think a lot of people in the global South kind of paused, I think. And I think part of that is I think there's a bit of distrust towards America from the global South. And I think, as the other panelists were saying, that vacuum now, China's seeing an opportunity because of the mistrust in America and in the West broadly. I think that is, for me, the broader issue that's happening in terms of this. So I do think this might be, because I'm not sure, this might be, in some sense, the emergence of a multipolar world where you don't have kind of a singular power like America, but you have a couple of different powers sort of vying for control, if that makes sense to everybody. So I don't know how that would pan out, as like sort of the panelists have been discussing in terms of what would happen to Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think there is a real possibility that there could be the emergence of a multipolar world. I don't know that's a good thing for nations like Taiwan, who need sort of allies, who need allies to sort of help them out if China kind of wants to steamroll them. So I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure, to be honest. So I'll put it back to the other panelists.
No, absolutely. Let's throw it to Chris, and I want to add something to this, because there's something to be said about the notion of if I can use your expression, a multipolar world, if you will. Because one area in which you might see that happening very quickly, that's if the Russians and the Chinese have their way, is the abandoning, or as they're proposing, the abandoning of the use of the dollar as a backing currency, especially for buying petrochemicals and, or rather, excuse me, I'm mincing my words here, for buying petroleum products, including oil products. If they then start adopting the yuan, for example, indeed there's a comment to that effect here, let me put it up on screen, from ULB. If the petrodollar changes to the yuan, then as he puts it, World War III will happen. I mean, this is a big point of contention, Chris, which the Americans would obviously be worried about as they watch Russia and China cozy up together like this.
You want me to address that?
No, go ahead, dude.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, the fact that oil's traded in dollars has been a great advantage for Americans from time immemorial. It's fantastic for us. It anchors the global financial system, really helps us. When oil price goes up, South Africa gets hit with a double whammy. You got the declining rand and the price going up in actual price. You get hit twice. We don't. We just get hit with the rising or falling price. So it works out really well. If in fact that happens, it would be disastrous for the global economy, not just for the U.S., but it's not going to happen anytime soon. The yuan is a joke. It's backed by U.S. treasuries and bonds. There's nothing in China to back it up. So this is, I think, a red herring, as is this idea that the United States is Pax Americana is waning. I've seen this movie 37 times since 1970. Every time I hear Pax Americana is dying, it comes back with a vengeance. I'm not in favor or opposed to it, but we are truly, which analysts here have said on the panel, alluded to, we're in a multipolar world now. That's been the development for the past 20 years. And ironically, that's a consequence of the United States. The United States fueled this multipolar world by sponsoring China's entry into the World Trade Organization, knowing full well that they would commit trade right infringements, they would do intellectual property theft, copyright infringements, and they would put artificial and physical barriers in place to prevent free trade in China. Knowing this, it was a dirty deal done by the Clinton administration and subsequent American administrations and countries in the West. And now UK is also ran. It's they're a rounding error. Don't even matter in the global economy. So is Russia, other than minerals and the fact they have nuclear weapons. They really don't matter on the world stage. That's where they matter. So yeah, this Pax Americana dying. We have a demented lunatic who's running the country. This will pass, and we'll come back. We'll come back. By the way, America being challenged around the world didn't happen there for 4 years when crazy old Donald Trump was running the country. North Korea stopped firing nuclear or intercontinental ballistic missiles over Japan's airspace, an act of war. Stopped it, full stop. We also saw the Chinese back up in their box a little bit. They slowed down their construction in the South China Sea. They've also backed off a lot of their stuff. They didn't challenge us elsewhere. And by the way, China can be shut down in a couple of days. All we have to do is block the Straits of Malacca, and they collapse in a matter of days. Now, they'll fight tooth and nail to stop that, and that would be a global war, but easy to shut them down. As far as the Uganda thing, I've seen this movie too before, Sindile. I was in Uganda when they passed similar legislation in 2013, and the president promised my ambassador, Scott DeLisi, that he would never sign it. Of course, Barack Hussein Obama, desperate for attention in America, distracting from his failures in Benghazi and elsewhere, turned it into a big issue and said, oh, we care about homosexuality. Ladies and gentlemen, while most Americans respect and care about gay and bisexuality, they don't really care about this as an issue. This is political nonsense between the Biden regime, which is distracting America from its proxy war in Ukraine, and Hunter Biden and its deficit spending, destruction of the dollar. It's all nonsense. Uganda will do what Uganda wants to do. They're a sovereign state, and we will still give them aid. The United States gives them over $360 million a year in aid for their healthcare system. Without our aid, there would be no healthcare in Uganda. It would collapse overnight. We are not going to do that. We have a moral obligation. It's not going to stop. This is just posturing. That's the word I'm looking for. It's not going to happen. But we are in a multipolar world, and there are consequences to it. A multipolar world is what got us into the First World War. The consequences of states overreacting and overestimating their capability led in a series of alliances to the First World War. That's a very simplified explanation, but it is the case. A bipolar world, while it's not ideal, was relatively stable. Unfortunately, a lot of victims around the world, particularly in African proxy wars. But hey, I guess that's the cost of a bipolar world.
Now, I mean, it gets interesting here, guys. And as I said, I did request that extra 15 minutes for this very reason. So I'm hoping that's okay with everybody. It really just will be 15 minutes because South Africa is not immune to any of this, you know, and this is really where it's why I took the long road to get to this particular part of the story, which is, you know, when you start having the international community sort of bare its fangs towards Russia because of its conduct. You know, there's a Zulu expression, or it's now called an African proverb, of when two elephants fight, you know, the grass and the trees suffers. Well, South Africa is definitely a blade of grass in this fight. And what do I mean by this? I'm talking, of course, about this piece of news as I try and get it on screen. Bear with me, guys. It takes a few seconds. It should be up in a moment as it is loading. Please do yourself a favor and subscribe to the Big Daddy Liberty channel on YouTube and hit that like button right now. South African government, of course, is seeking legal advice on whether they should and will, or have to, that is, arrest Putin, that's Vladimir Putin, Russian president, when he appears next month at a meeting scheduled, the BRICS meeting summit in August. Is it this year or next year? This year, pardon me. Give me a second, pardon me, just to read the first two paragraphs. South Africa's government is taking legal advice on how to handle an international criminal court warrant of arrest for President Vladimir Putin in the event, of course, that the Russian leader attends a BRICS summit here in South Africa in August. Now, the ICC issued the warrant against Putin on March 18 for war crimes related to the alleged abduction of children from the Ukraine. South Africa, as you'll know, is a signatory to the Rome Statute that established the court and may be obliged to execute the arrest order, end of quote. Now, of course, this places South Africa in a massive quandary here. Before I go to my panelists, let me play a segment here, a comment, pardon me, from the Foreign Affairs Minister, Unaledi Pandor. Just give me a second as I load that. Remember, as I am actually loading it, if you like the show, then Big Daddy will donate. I don't know what I'll donate, but just like the show, people. Like the show. Like the show. All right. Here's some comments made by Unaledi Pandor, speaking, of course, during the visit of the Belgian royal family to the Union buildings. She was caught by journalists on the outskirts of that particular Belgium-South Africa meeting, and she was asked about the issue of the International Criminal Court and having to arrest Vladimir Putin.
And
oh, pish posh. Oh, there you go. All right.
Heads of State of BRICS and is invited to the summit. And I think, as I've said previously, the ICC warrant is obviously a matter that is of concern. South Africa is a member state of the International Criminal Court, so we'll have to have a discussion in the context of cabinet to decide exactly how we respond.
Do you know, Minister, when that meeting or that discussion will take place?
It must be as soon as possible. The summit is coming up in
Around the
August,
corner, yeah.
and we need to have clarified exactly how.
Do you find the ICC to be unfair in the way they
Well, I have made the point previously. You would know about the whole issue of double standards in global affairs. There are many countries that have been involved in wars, in invasion of territory, in killing people, arresting political activists. None of them have ever been called up by the ICC. So it seems if you're powerful and enjoy particular status in the global community, you escape. And this does worry us because I think it dims the objective character of the ICC as an arbiter that is fair on all abuses of human rights and all infringements of humanitarian law.
What are you looking forward to about today's visit?
Greater trade, increased people-to-people exchange, and collaboration in the pharmaceutical sector in particular.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Okay, now before I get to my panel once again, that's of course the very posh way of describing the conundrum that is, Chris there. That's a very posh way of describing the conundrum that is the Putin and ICC debacle. Just a side note, anybody notice how the journalists try to emulate the minister's posh accent? I actually experience it sometimes when I'm out in public. People hear how I speak and they try and emulate it. It's actually funny. But nonetheless, I want to play you one more clip here, guys. As I said, it's yin and the yang. Or actually, no, I don't know how to describe this. It's from a very posh explanation. Let me take you now to the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, who Julius Malema, speaking on the same issue, much more animated, of course, basically saying Putin is welcome in South Africa, and if anybody tries to arrest him, he'll have to deal with the Red Berets, and that they'll obviously escort him from the airport. Lots of bluster, but he makes some points on this. Listen up.
ICC, Putin is welcomed here, and no one is going to arrest Putin. If needs be, we'll go and fetch Putin from the airport to his meeting. He will finish all his meetings, we'll take him back to the airport. We're not going to be told by these hypocrites of the International Criminal Court who know the real violators of human rights, who know the murderers of this world.
You're on mute, Sile. Mute.
Sorry, guys. Sorry. Gabriel, I'm going to throw it to you because, and just as I say that, I've lost Gabriel. Okay. Gideon, I'm going to throw it to you because I hate to say it. There is a slight argument being made here. Of course, it's not really... It's a little bit of sophistry, but there is an argument to be made around, the inconsistency of The Hague, the International Criminal Court. But it doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't arrest Putin if the man lands here, if, that is, of course, we are signatories of the Rome Statute as we are. And again, Gideon, even as I say this, will South Africa arrest Putin? Because we let Omar al-Bashir go when the ICC had a warrant of arrest for him, Sudan's president, that is.
So the odds of us arresting Vladimir Putin, you don't get a negative probability, right? So it can't even be that. It's just not going to happen. I don't know if they're going to negotiate a way that he just doesn't arrive for the summit, or that he sends his 2IC instead, or if there'll be some sort of compromise, or if he's just going to pitch, and then we'll still be discussing a response. And then by the time he left, like, oh no, we've decided what to do now, but he's kind of left. South Africa are the world-class champions in fence grinding, so it's not going to happen. I'm willing to bet a significant amount of money that it's not going to happen. I will also bet you that when it doesn't happen, the West is going to chimp out about it, but they would know ahead of time it's not going to happen. Our liberal journalists are going to chimp out about it, even though they know it's not going to happen. So I would recommend they chimp out ahead of time so that they can at least appear to be ahead of the curve. Because we have picked our bedfellows, and our bedfellows are China and Russia. And we would like to play nice with the West so long as it suits us. Which is the same thing while we're still a member of the ICC. Cool. Let's take a position. Are we in the ICC? Are we going to say this court? Yes, there are huge problems with it. But then we need to say we're not part of it. Then we need to make that call and leave. You can't be part of it. And then when you are required to behave in a certain way by this club you're a part of, you go and make excuses for it. So this is a fundamental problem with South African foreign policy. This is why no one takes us seriously. This is why unreliable. That's why people don't want to invest here, is because the government says one thing and does another. And you cannot take at face value anything they say. So are they going to arrest the guy? No. But however, look, if I was Vlad and the people who are going to come fetch me at the airport with the EFF, I would just stay at home. Like, seriously, I'd be like, no, thank you very much. Catch an Uber rather.
Sindile, let me come to you, Puti, before I come to Chris. I think there is, though, and I want to take a moment here, and I'm trying to play devil's advocate just for the sake of the conversation. I think there is something to be said, though, about what is being said is perhaps maybe patent hypocrisy when it comes to the International Criminal Court, where, I mean, Julius Malema makes the point in that same press conference that you have guys like Tony Blair, for example, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who openly said, hey, man, our invasion of Iraq was totally incorrect. We shouldn't have done that. The human rights violations that came out of that. Bush in the same boat, of course, having made a similar concession at some point, but not really fully. The question on someone's lips like Malema would be, why not issue warrants of arrest for those chaps? Is there an argument in this, Sindile? Leave aside whether we should arrest Putin or not as South Africa, but that argument itself, is it a valid one?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think I think it boils down generally to the mistrust people in the global South have towards these institutions, like the ICC. Because I think for a lot of people like Julius Malema, even if the ICC were to do different things, they are fundamentally seen as an extension of Western power. So I think that's the fundamental problem. I don't know how that would work in terms of arresting George W. Bush. I don't think that's even politically feasible anyway. I don't think that's worth a point worth discussing. I don't think you could arrest a former American president. So I don't really think there's anything there to say about it. But I do think what Malema is fundamentally saying kind of links back to what we were saying earlier in terms of this sort of like multipolar world that we're talking about and all of that kind of stuff, is that stuff like this will always happen as long as there's a mistrust of institutions that are seen as sort of an extension of Western power. And I think that's what Julius Malema is sort of chafing against. Yes, there's quite a bit of sophistry on his part, but the same thing with Omar al-Bashir. You were mentioning it earlier. Julius Malema had the same sort of strident objections against the arresting of Omar al-Bashir. Very weird, by the way, considering it goes against his very fundamental thing about we protect poor Black people who are being attacked, etc., etc., etc. I don't know. I think they get overwhelmed by the fact that the ICC is an extension for them of Western power, and I think that's where it ends for them.
Chris, I must bring it to you because, even before I ask you to comment, I want to put something on screen here because the stakes actually are very real. Let's leave aside what the law says, the international law says, and what South Africa is a signatory of, or whatever the case may be. The point Sindile made in relation to US presidents never having to face the prospect of ever being arrested. Why? Because the US would likely bomb the you-know-what out of that nation is a threat, by the way, the Russians have made themselves. Let me just put this on screen and bear with me, please, Chris, as I do this, because it's a threat that the Russians have overtly made, by the way. It should be on screen, right? Yeah, okay. There it is. The Telegraph writing up the comments by Russian Prime Minister Vladimir, Dmitry, the ex-president Dmitry Medvedev. You can see the heading there. UK-Russia war. Russia will bomb any country that arrests Putin. I just want to read the first few paragraphs here. Russia would bomb any country that detains Vladimir Putin using the International Criminal Court's warrant of arrest. That's according to Russia's ex-president Dmitry Medvedev. The IEC, of course, last week called Putin a war criminal over his alleged role in the abduction of thousands of Ukrainian children, often from orphanages or care homes. But Mr. Medvedev cautioned any attempt to execute that arrest warrant would be seen by Russia as a declaration of war. End of quote. Chris, I hate to say it, dude, we can't pretend as if that threat is an idle one, especially for South Africans who are facing this conundrum ahead of the BRICS meeting in August.
Well, there's so much to unpack here, but I'll tell you what, spoiler alert, South Africa will not arrest Vladimir Putin. It's not going to happen. All right, so here's the problem with this, and this goes back to the whole issue. I find it comical to find African states whining about the International Criminal Court because they actually get more power in the criminal court than anyone else. They have more representatives on the court than many other countries as a continent. And additionally, the jurisdiction, here's the thing. First off, Vladimir Putin is not even eligible for arrest. This is a bogus indictment, a bogus arrest warrant. They have no authority, no jurisdiction over him. You have to meet several conditions under the Rome Statute that was drafted by the United States, but we refused to sign under Clinton because it didn't provide protections for U.S. political officials like George Bush. So we did not sign it. If you're not a signatory to the Rome Statute, it has no jurisdiction over you no matter what. Now, they have to have 3 categories of areas in order for them to claim jurisdiction. And a crime must be committed in a country where they have jurisdiction, in other words, a signatory, but it has to be done by a member of a state that is a signatory to it. So it's a toothless, paperless tiger. It's fascinating because I find these so-called brilliant legal experts like Wendell Nortkia at the University of Western Cape, who wrote an entire paper about the whole thing with Bashir and about South Africa had an obligation. South Africa has no right to arrest Putin. They have no authority. Russia's not a signatory to the Rome Statute. Therefore, there's no authority. So you have to be a signatory to the statute, number one, which most African countries are. Number two, you have to have a government that says we are unwilling or incapable of prosecuting this person. Therefore, number three, we request that you prosecute them. Those 3 conditions must be met before anybody can be tried by the Hague. This is ludicrous, to say the very least. Now, the United States helped negotiate this treaty. We backed out of it because countries indicated they weren't going to respect the Article 98 waiver process that was part of the treaty. So hence, we did not sign it, and we backed away. Sudan backed out of the treaty in 2008. They never ratified it, so it never applied to them. They issued an illegitimate warrant against Bashir, a thoroughly disgusting human being who doesn't deserve to see the light of day, before he left office. But it doesn't matter. You have no jurisdiction. The moment that this international norm, this breaking of the international system states, the Westphalian system states, goes into effect by a rogue organization, like the International Criminal Court, then we have a breaking apart of all international norms. There is no jurisdiction. Now, however, if a South African official commits a war crime, say in Cabo Delgado province, chopping up human beings, that's a crime against humanity. If that happens, and the South African government, for whatever reason, because of politics, because domestic concerns, says we can't or are unwilling to prosecute it, but we're a signatory, would you prosecute the person? Then they can issue a warrant, and then they can arrest that person in a country that is also a signatory. But Russia's not a signatory. This is just ludicrous. They have no territorial jurisdiction over that person, and they only have temporal jurisdiction of where the crimes were committed, supposedly. As far as George Malema, he's an idiot. George Bush is exempted under Article 98, recognized by over 140 countries. So George Bush is not even on the table here. But I'll put my red beret back on here and talk about these hypocrites and the hippopotami of the International Criminal Court. Anyway, so that's just the bottom line here. The whole thing is, in my view, ludicrous. They're not going to arrest him. If they didn't arrest Bashir, a thoroughly disgusting and vile human being, they're not going to arrest Putin, whom they need for trade and for other things. It's just not going to happen. This whole thing is just it's a damn squib in my mind. This is a bunch of leftists who seek global control over our finances, over legal matters, over international governance. They don't have this authority unless your state has signed a treaty and ratified. It's the same thing like when people lost their mind. Oh my God, Trump has pulled out of Paris. Oh, the world is going to fall apart. We are not in the Paris Climate Accord. Our Senate never ratified it when the Democrats controlled it, when the Republicans controlled it. Unless the Senate ratifies a treaty, it does not have the effect of law in this country. Presidents can sign whatever they want. It's a beauty contest, and that's what Obama did. We're not in it, and we're not in the Rome Statute, and neither is Russia, neither is Sudan. So, hey, go visit South Africa, man. If I'm Putin, I recommend you try the garden route. It's fantastic. You should do it. And I know somebody can do with it. We have a friend of mine. We did it together. Check it out, man.
Oh my goodness. The comment said tonight. I'm gonna come to Gabriel in a moment. I just saw Slippery Pickle. It's Pickle Rick in the comment section there. Let's be honest, even if Putin did get arrested, he's more than capable of bribing his way out of SA custody. Putin, bring that cool drink money, brother, and you'll be sorted. Cool drink, Baba, cool drink. Bro, Gabriel, let me come to you because I lost you before. I actually wanted to pose this issue to you, and I've put a few things on the table since you're out. But dude, wrap it up for me insofar as this particular topic with your view. South Africa, though, it must be said, and I hear Chris's point, but South Africa is in a bit of a pickle here. Excuse the pun, the slippery pickle, but they are in a little bit of a pickle insofar as they're going to fall under, or they're going to endure, a lot of pressure from the international community ahead of this BRICS summit in August. Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what Chris was saying, but I think to feel the pickle brine bite in South Africa's context, it's worth adding a couple of technical details. One of them is that when Omar al-Bashir had his arrest warrant issued, it was on the back of a UN Security Council resolution to have the Sudanese... Fair point, Gabriel, fair point. That's the one exception. But Russia is a permanent member and they'll veto anything against Putin. So anyway. Correct. So there is that distinction that they tried a new thing because of the jurisdictional problems Chris was describing. And they were like, okay, if the Security Council all agrees this guy needs to go, then he needs to go. That's why there was so much pressure. Here's how South Africa wriggled out of that. We allowed Bashir to go from the convention center to the airport while filing an application to a magistrate to file to a higher court in order to find a declarator on whether or not the ICC order was actually implementable. The tricky thing is the declarator came out and said, yes, you must issue an arrest warrant. And so the precedent in terms of domestic South African law is strong that you have to issue an arrest warrant if someone has an arrest warrant issued by the ICC because of our commitments in the Rome statutes. So we have ratified, and our courts have now set this precedent that as long as there's an ICC arrest warrant, we have to enforce it. What's different about this case from the international perspective is what Chris said. But let me just add something to that as well. So
is Ukraine? So one of the thoughts is Russia's not a signatory, but if Ukraine were a signatory, it's happening on Ukrainian territory. That can be a way in. But Ukraine is not a signatory to the ICC convention. If you look it up, Ukraine ambassador and plenipotentiary to the United Nations, a former justice on the Yugoslav post-Yugoslav tribunal, this leading legal mind gave an interview last year to pro-Ukrainian media saying, look, we should be in the ICC. If we had ratified a proper sign-up to the Rome Statute, arrest warrants would already be out for Putin, for Medvedev, for Shoigu, for various others, definitely for Prigozhin, the head of Wagner. But we aren't. We need to do this. Why are they not signed up? Well, you can ask Tatiana Yevashenko, one of the pro-Ukrainian, pro-Maidan journalists, now MPs, who's been making the argument, if Ukraine signs up to the convention properly, they too, their leader, Zelensky, can be tried for war crimes. Is there evidence of Ukrainian war crimes? The United Nations came out on Friday with a preliminary report on prisoners of war saying the Russians have killed 15 Ukrainian prisoners of war and the Ukrainians have killed 25 Russian prisoners of war. They found evidence of rapes on both sides. They found evidence of torture on both sides. They have found very hard, the United Nations head of that commission said, we're very distressed about the evidence of the Ukrainian army conducting crimes against humanity. If you go back a little bit to the Azov battalion days with the, I don't even want to get into that because that's like spicy cough stuff. You're going to get cancelled if you, but just let me tell you, whoever's in charge of Ukraine does not want the Ukrainian territory to be properly signed up to the Roman Statute. So Ukraine, there's a double jurisdictional failure, which is that Russia is not signed up to the Roman Statute and Ukraine is not signed up to the Roman Statute. In that situation, for this arrest warrant to come out is pretty curious. I think that it could be the end of the ICC. I want to say a small little aside, which is just that I spoke about this on a Two Crickets episode at the end of last year. There's a case in front of the Supreme Court of the United States about child law. My own view is the Children's Act, the child's best interest should be taken to heart. There's this crazy law in America, I'm going to call it crazy, where Native American Indian kids are supposed to, there's a kid who's being ripped out of a family in Texas with white parents and with their own biological sibling in that family, adopted successfully. This kid is 4, the older sister is 6, 7. They want to take the kid out because of a bygone law that says you must rather put them with kids of their own race. Even though this kid has been with these parents since it was 6 months old. The only mom and dad it knows are these parents. And you hear the Biden administration's argument for why by the way, it's stipulated by both sides. The best interest of the child is to stay with the only mom and dad it knows, to stay with the brother and sister that it knows. But the argument from the other side is, but what about the tribe? You don't want to dilute its numbers. That's the kind of thing in play here. By the way, Russian officials that have taken Ukrainian kids to bring them up in Russia, I think that's wicked. I think it's wicked to try and rip that little kid out of that Texan home because white parents are not good and must rather be with brown parents. Kids don't need color. Kids need parents that they love and that they love. It's a very delicate business. I think that there should be proper investigations, and I hope for the best chance of proper, legitimate restoration of justice. But I'm very pessimistic about that outcome because of the flagrant hypocrisies involved, of the double jurisdictional deficit, nevertheless not getting in the way of the arrest warrant. I think that because of course the ICC is never going to complain about that thing in America. It's never going to, which it shouldn't, by the way. I'm not saying it should. It shouldn't. It's not its business. But it's not its business here either because the law's not on its side. And it's a court. It can't be making moral judgments. You want to make the moral judgment, go ahead and make it. I think there's a good judgment to be made. But the court shouldn't be there. I think, sadly, because I was a defender as a kid, I had great dreams for the ICC helping Africa in particular. I think it shot its credibility so badly in the foot. I don't know how it can recover from this. And I think that probably we are going to pull out. And that's going to be a hard thing for it to recover from.
Speaking about a difficult thing to do, a difficult thing to pull out or end the show. Guys, I'm sorry, we've completely run out of time. Again, I knew it was going to happen when you start cooking with grease on the show. But nonetheless, maybe this is a topic we can pick up at another stage. Guys, as I always do at the end of the show, just a round of how people can contact you on social media. Sindile, let me begin with you, Putwami. How do the folks find you on social media?
On Facebook, Sindile Vabaza, but I'm a bit off now because I'm feeling a bit ill. So, but they can find me on there. They can, yeah, totally. I'm not on any other social media though.
No worries. As I always say, or as you say in Hebrew, Refuah Shlema, my brother. Hope you feel much better. And thank you very much for having joined us tonight. That is, of course, Sindile Vabaza, who, of course, is a writer and analyst. You find a lot of his content on the Daily Friend publication. That's dailyfriend.co.za. Gabriel, how do the folks find you? And what can we expect on your podcast, Two Crickets on a Thorn Tree?
We've had a little hiatus with Two Crickets, but we're coming back with an episode next week. Got a report coming out on taxes pretty soon, which we'll write about it on the Daily Friend and on irr.org.za. Headline finding: South Africa has had the fastest increase in the size of government, together with a decrease in the effectiveness in spending, of any place in the world in the last 20 years. So
it's one achievement by the ANC.
Riddle me that.
That, of course, is Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations, also a co-host of Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree. Please make sure you check them out. Indeed, Ular Solis in the comment section has actually put something up. There he is, Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa Show. How do the folks get in touch with you, and what can you expect from your content?
Sindile, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. It was a great panel. Enjoyed it tonight. Well, folks can find me on my shadow banned YouTube channel at Colonel Chris Wyatt. That's Wyatt like an herb, not as in the color white. Colonel Chris Wyatt. You can also find me on that Chi-Com platform until my illegitimate government bans it here in America, censoring free speech. That's called TikTok. And my handle there is at Africa Matters, because, hey, Africa does matter, despite what a lot of people think. You can find me everywhere else, Gitter, Twitter, all that other stuff. But almost nobody follows me. Most of my content is followed on Chris Wyatt Africa or at Colonel Chris Wyatt on YouTube. That's the best place to find me. Once again, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And listen, you can also find me pretty soon on my new channel called Red Beret Radio. Radio Red Beret. We'll be covering that. This is the closest I could find to a red Teletubby. It's the Japan mascot from the 2019 World Cup. So there you go. So if you can find me at Red Beret Radio, where I'll be expelling the views of the exalted Commander-in-Chief, Julius Malema. Thank you so much.
I will be making sure to expropriate that channel without compensation. That, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa Show. Make sure you check him out on YouTube. And, of course, thank you, dear viewer, for this. Joining us for another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Remember, this is my only long format show that I have. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm hoping to get more used to putting timestamps on the recordings of these shows, just to make it easier for people to navigate through the different topics. Shout out to Ular Solis in the comment section, who always does stellar work in putting up the information of everybody in on the panel. With that being said, thank you so much once again. A reminder to you, please, as I always say, no, I haven't gotten to that point yet, that if you can, please, guys, hit that like button on your way out. It really, really helps. Trust me when I say that. And of course, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Help me grow my numbers and help me reach my goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And guys, remember, you can support the work that we do on the channel. We're about to hit the road next month. There's a lot of exciting things and a lot of exciting campaigns. A lot of you guys criticize me. You say, oh, but Big Daddy, you always do a lot of talking. It's just a talk show host. When are you actually going to do something to push your ideas into the communities across this country? Well, we're doing exactly that next month. So I'm going to make those announcements soon. We're just fundraising at the moment, and you can assist, of course, by becoming a part of the BDL contributors, guys who put aside 75 Rand per month towards the show. Find a payment method that suits you there on our website at BigDaddyLiberty.com. With that being said, guys, thanks for watching. And as I always do say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.